It's the dentistry. Give him a hand, please.
Hello, well, welcome here. I just want to say I'll try to make this loud. I just finished doing one of the round tables. I'm a little hoarse from hollering because it was so noisy in there, so hopefully they'll be able to hear me. If not,
I'll interject. I'm sure
exactly.
I'm the COO of the SAG-AFTRA fund, and I'm running the slideshow. I'm really good at my job.
So I think, first I guess my question is, how many songwriter singers do we have here? And record producers? Okay, that's a good, you know, okay.
Musicians, vocalists?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, what we do is we collect statutory royalties within the U.S. and royalties pursuant to agreements we make with foreign collecting societies. We do so on behalf of non-featured performers. In other words, that means background singers, session musicians. So I know a lot of you already are saying, well, I'm a featured artist, I'm a songwriter, singer. But the interesting thing is that a lot of people here, and you go throughout your career, you're going to wear a lot of hats. So those of you who think you're just a featured performer, you'll be surprised throughout your career how many times you might play guitar on a friend's record, do a background vocal for somebody. You might produce a record where you don't have a letter of direction with the artist. You might actually perform some function as non-featured performer. All of those things will actually get you a royalty from us.
In addition to your ASCAP royalties.
In addition to your ASCAP, so I think one of the questions is, how are we different from ASCAP or BMI or CSAC? So what happens is those organizations, and we have, by the way, from ASCAP, Seth Stallman's in the back right here. I want to say, Seth is one
I'll
of
be taking questions much later.
After a few drinks.
And I would say that we partner with a lot of organizations, and ASCAP is one of our partners, and it was at the beginning of our audio-visual royalties, one of our partners helped us be able to identify the license recording versus underscore and all that stuff. So we really need a lot of help to do this. So as we go through the presentation, it's a very complicated fund. So I do like to say that, you think of, who gets money from the fund. A lot of you know that Stevie Wonder's going to be here tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
So, well, Stevie gets literally from Sound Exchange. How many people have heard of Sound Exchange? Yeah. Okay, and featured artists, how many of you are members of Sound Exchange who are actually featured artists? Well, everybody who is a featured artist should register with Sound Exchange because they're going to take care of your royalties as a featured performer. Also, there's a small organization called ARC, which has a private copy, and we can talk about them a little bit as well. So, but anyway, so Stevie Wonder gets literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars a year from Sound Exchange. He also gets thousands of dollars a year from us. And that's because he actually, besides being a featured artist, Stevie Wonder also plays harmonica, a lot of the records, he'll sing on somebody's record. So he does function as a non-featured performer. So you see even some of the biggest name featured performers are going to have some royalties. So where do we get the money from? The big question is, where does it come from? So there's two things that happen. And I want to say that before 1995, this was really a wasteland in the U.S. There were no royalties paid for performers. So when somebody's record gets paid, and I sort of say the difference between ASCAP and our fund, is ASCAP, CSAC, and BMI pay royalties to writers and publishers. So if you write a song or publish a song, you get your royalties that are played when a song is played on the radio, when it's played on television, when it has an exhibition of one of those type of things, you get paid as either the writer or the publisher or both. A good example is like Dolly Parton wrote a great song for Whitney Houston called I Will Always Love You from the movie Bodyguard. So that was a huge hit. Dolly Parton, and I believe Warner Brothers was the publisher on that song, made a lot of money every time that was played on the radio. But Whitney Houston didn't make a single penny for any of the radio performances, not one penny. So all the millions of times that was played on the radio, on the AFM radio, on AM radio, FM radio, all over the world, she didn't get a penny for that. And the reason is because we don't have a copyright protection for sound recordings and terrestrial radio. We didn't have any protection. Now, in 1995, a very significant thing happened. We got the very, very first performance right in sound recording was for private copies. So it was like something that really is kind of not a huge deal now because, it covered like DAT recorders and digital audio tape and all that kind of stuff. It also covers blank CDs to the extent that they record music, but it's a very small tariff, and it excludes all kinds of things. So any device that hooks to a computer is excluded because the device is not made primarily for recording music. Now, we all know that all kinds of music is transferred, via computer, and for many people, that's the only thing you use a computer for. But it was excluded from that. But that act did one incredibly important thing for us, and that gave us the right to go collect royalties from other countries. All the other countries that were collecting royalties for U.S. performers, but not paying any performers because we didn't have a reciprocal right. This was the first time that we have a right in the U.S. So it was the first kind of foot in the door was called neighboring rights. Neighboring right means that I'll pay you for your performances here if you pay me for my performances someplace else. So we basically, I'll pay you for yours, you pay me for mine. So it did that, and for the gift thing. The next thing that happened, much more significance, was the Digital Millennium Copyright Act in 1998, and that actually provided a copyright protection for performers on things like webcasting, subscription services like XM Sirius, cable radio, those kind of things. Now that's proven to be a huge deal here. It also has digital radio, but we don't really broadcast digital radio in this country, so we don't really get to collect much for that in foreign territories. But so anyway, so where the money comes from, it flows through Sound Exchange collects the money pursuant to the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. The money comes to Sound Exchange, and it comes to us. The money from the private copy comes directly from the Copyright Office. So both those things feed money to our fund, and then we do all this research, we locate the performers, we find out who they are, and that filters down to paying the sound recorders. Now, just to give you some idea of what that comes from webcasting, a lot of these are big things you've heard of, like I'm sure you've heard of iHeartRadio, Google Play, a lot of these things. A lot of them are like Pandora. Some of these are very small things, though, but they all pay into this. So those are just an idea of just some of the things that pay into the webcasting. We also collect money from the subscription services. Those are like obviously Music Choice, Pandora, Sirius XM Radio. And then there's also direct licensing, which is where somebody actually licenses their catalog to a subscription service, and then that is also paid in. There's a lot of controversy about the direct licensing, and I don't know if I want to talk too much about that, but there's a lot of talk where record companies are actually licensing their catalogs, and then they're collecting the money directly. In most of those situations, the subscription services still go ahead and pay Sound Exchange for the artists who pass the money on to us. The danger in direct licensing is in the future whether the record companies will really keep all that money, and then they're going to cross-collateralize those payments. So whatever they cross-collateralize, they hold the royalties till the artists pay back the money. Now, most of you have, if you've had record deals, you know that you can have a record that's selling a whole bunch, and you still seem to be losing money. So that's because they're basically charging you for everything, all the advertising and everything else. So the direct licensing has the ability to really diminish, performance monies, but right now those monies are still flowing through. Anyway, then there's private copy, which comes directly through the Copyright Office. And you can see that's for blank CDs, digital audio tape, and any of those kind of things.
And the current legislation against the auto manufacturers.
And I should, that's a very good point. Right now, we have the whole private copy money. Most of our private copy money comes from Europe. Still, it's a big issue in Europe. People get paid a lot of money for private copy. In this country, literally, it's down to a few $1,000s a year. But when you look at when the device has to be used primarily for recording music. Now, most of you who have cars, I'm sure almost everybody now who buys any reasonably new car, late model car, one of the features of that car is some kind of hard drive where you can rip music and you put your CD in and you copy that music. And we held the position that actually, even though that's not anticipated in the law never says anything about audio manufacturers, but still it's a device used primarily for the capture of music. And so we have a pretty significant lawsuit right now that we're working on with ARC, the Alliance of Artists and Record Companies. And they, if we have the ability to collect the auto manufacturers, that's going to put new life into that. It's going to be very significant because not only is it going to put life into the private copy here, but it's going to help a lot of the foreign collecting societies do the same because the same auto manufacturers, right? Toyota, Honda, Daimler, Chrysler, all need to do the same auto. Now it's become a global business, so all these auto manufacturers are worldwide. So that's going to be a huge boon to this part of this. And then the foreign royalties. Now, these come from everything. They come from digital performance on radio, private copy. And then it also has a very unique thing. We actually get in foreign territories. Right now we have a handful, but Spain, Germany, hopefully Brazil pretty soon, Norway. We're looking at a few different territories that actually pay for music that's in a motion picture. So if the audio portion of the score, the underscore, and the sound recordings that are in a motion picture, so we actually pay a royalty when those are exhibited both in cinemas and when they're on television or on cable. And that's our newest area, and that's, as I mentioned.
We pay the featured and non-featured artists for that. Sometimes we pass through the money back to Sound Exchange instead of then sending us the money. But for the most part, we collect from all audiovisual. Pursuant to our deal with ASCAP that provided us the cue sheets to make this happen, we can tell the amount of minutes and seconds on a particular track or on the underscore itself to be able to calculate what's due to the featured and non-featured artists, or both on the underscore and the licensed sound.
So just to give you a flavor of what happens is, on a motion picture, we have to identify, as Sherry mentioned, we have to identify how many minutes and seconds are licensed sound recordings and how many minutes and seconds are underscore. But that's just the beginning. We also have to identify all the different performers, the featured artists and the non-featured on all those sound recordings. We also have to find all of the musicians who played on the score. You can imagine if it's a score like something like a Jurassic Park or something, there can be as many as 400 musicians who worked on that over the course of several weeks. We have to find every one of those people and pay them a royalty. So everybody who, the last chair violinist to the principal oboe player, to every one of those people, all and everybody in between, all have to be located and stuff like that. So it's a big deal. I don't know if I mentioned earlier, and I'm not sure if I should, but so all of this, so this is where the money comes from. So what does this generate? You know, I mean, if the way it works, are we looking at the next steps? We've already seen that what's happened is that physical product is disappearing, and I think it doesn't take anybody with a giant crystal ball to see that we're going to see almost no physical product. We're seeing certainly subscription services are going to stay, but they're going to be going by the wayside, and you don't even see what's happening with streaming. And the real, you know, sort of gold standard of collecting royalties is going to be from streaming over the next few years. What's going to happen after that? It will be something. Somebody will be standing here in a few years telling you, you know, we used to collect a lot of money in streaming, and streaming was a really big thing, and it'll be some new big thing that I don't have a clue of. It's going to be where the money is. So what's happening is an ever-changing landscape. But the amazing thing about that is these funds are positioned to kind of move with the flow. We're going to be able to collect money from all of these things. So it doesn't matter what's next. Whatever happens next, we're in a position to be able to capture that money. So, where does the money not come from? Okay, so it doesn't come from things, from the interactive services. So in other words, things that you pick and choose, you know, anything is kind of a point of purchase. Things like YouTube, Vivo, Tidal, iTunes, Spotify. These are all kind of any kind of downloads, podcasts. These are types of things that are basically permanent audio copies, you know, things that you actually, purchase to own. Those really aren't, that's not pursuant to the performance royalties.
There is some iTunes that we saw on the other screen that we do pay, like iTunes Radio, things that are not, that downloadable and that you can't manipulate, that if you just pick from a selection, like the radio, iTunes Radio, that is covered by both Sound Exchange and us.
So what does all this mean? So
I think it's like your international slide.
We're getting there. I don't think we have for collections here. Okay. I'll give you an idea though of the complexity. So we have our domestic monies. Every one of these little flags here, this is all of the places we have agreements internationally. Now some of these are pretty big places, like France and the UK and Germany and Spain, and some of them are really small. We have agreements in Latvia and Portugal and Slovenia and Slovakia, and so it's sort of like it's a volume business. The idea is to be able to collect these royalties everywhere. The other value of this is that each country we get an agreement with sets a precedent for another agreement and allows us to go in more and more countries to get royalties. So while the domestic royalties are still the biggest piece of our pie, you can see that we've put a lot of time and energy. Was there a question?
Yeah, what's SCAPR?
SAG-AFTRA.
SAG-AFTRA.
That's the Society's Council for Performers' Rights. We're called a CMO, as opposed to ASCAP, which is a PRO. A CMO is a collective management organization. We belong to SAG-AFTRA, which has, I think, 60 members on 50-something nations. And we're all collective management organizations across the world that collect and swap, exchange money for the performers we represent. So what, you'll hear words like reciprocity and the thing that we're gonna talk about, fair play, fair pay. We in the United States don't have terrestrial airplay rights, so we don't get paid. You do get paid through ASCAP for a small percentage. You're trying to get a better percentage. But performers, a musician or vocalist, does not get paid for their airplay on radio. We share that with only a few countries in the third world, and you'll see that later. The rest of the world does that, so there are some countries that we've been able to agree, and we swap them for a right, a neighboring right, that they may not have, like private copy. In return, they're sending us broadcast rights. So the important thing is we're setting precedents and how to negotiate better agreements, that we're exchanging money constantly, even if it's not true reciprocity, which is what we're doing with Brazil audiovisual. The US does not have an audiovisual right. It goes through the major motion picture studios, and it's done very differently than it is overseas. I don't want to talk too much and take away from Dennis.
No,
We'll get to it.
but it's true that we have, that's a good point. So even though what's happening, and I mentioned those first two copyright acts, they basically gave us entree. We were allowed to join SAG-AFTRA. Think of SAG-AFTRA as sort of like a League of Nations for rights collected, for people who collect, this is just for performance rights. It's not for publishing and writers, it's just for performers. And so it's an interesting group because you can see here, this is just a smattering of other countries. As Sherry mentioned, we have 60 countries.
And our sister organizations, ARC and Sound Exchange, are also members of SAG-AFTRA.
But it gives us also a forum to sit down and talk about rights management for different people. So we've been able to say, you know, to somebody, we'll trade you private copies, which you don't have in your country, if you'll give us a broadcast right in yours. But it was those initial Copyright Act and the changes of that actually gave us a seat at the table. And so not only do we sit at the table to exchange rights, but interpretations of how the WIPO, the World Trade and Intellectual Property Organization, the rules that they set. There's an awful lot of the trades that are in the European Economic Union. They set regulations affecting all of Europe, but we've been actually been able to work with them to see how some of that affects the U.S. and actually affect U.S. monies pursuant to actually the European Trade Organization and some of the EU regulations. We've been able to help negotiate sort of a seat at that table for the U.S. as well. So the foreign rights, they're not the biggest part of our economic picture. They're clearly growing and have the potential to be, you know, every bit as big as our domestic ones.
Especially for us, because our organization, unlike Sound Exchange, pays private copy and audiovisual rights. Sound Exchange only does digital broadcast. And as we'll see on a slide later, the split among the record producers, the featured artists, and non-featured artists are very different in the United States than they are in the rest of the world. So the AFM and SAG-AFTRA Fund is actively pursuing foreign rights because the split for featured and non-featured is much more close to a 50-50 split than it is in the United States, and we'll get to that in a moment.
And please feel free to ask questions
Yeah.
to go on. We're happy with questions. So let's see what I was doing. So in the US, what happens is the money that comes in, 50% goes to the copyright holder, which is traditionally the record company. 45% goes to the featured performers. So this could be a solo performer or members of a band, or it could be an artist or a band and their record producer, depending on how their deal is struck. And a whopping 5% comes to us to go to the background singers and session musicians.
And this is US statutory royalties only, not foreign.
In foreign territories, see how the world over, the record company gets half of it. That's the way it always works. No matter what we do, the record company gets half. But in foreign territories, it's quite common for the split to be between featured and non-featured, 60% for the featured performers and 40% for the non-featured performers, which is obviously why the foreign agreements are even greater importance to us, because we get a larger share of those than we get in the US. Even with that, though, I should say, and I don't know if we have numbers, do we actually have numbers here about that? We'll see here. Let me just say this, that with the 5% and the foreign royalties together, the fund started off way back in 1999, literally with $250,000 in the bank, no distribution, one employee, and covered like 6 years of distribution. So in other words, we had nothing when we started. last year we distributed $60 million to performers. So when so as you're sitting here saying, so what's the point of all this? Well, the point is that there was a lot of money out there, and even if you're primarily a featured artist, I said, there can be significant monies for you as a non-featured performer, and as your career progresses, you know, you may be a number of things. I have a very good friend who started off her career as a featured artist, who only now works as a background singer, but she works as a background singer for like some of the top acts, and you know, she tours and records and spends all her time in the studio. So her whole early part of her career was a featured performer, and the last half of her career has actually been sort of more robust, and she's actually made more money as a non-featured performer. So
I just people like Vince Gill, featured and non-featured. He gets plenty of money from us as well as Sound Exchange for the role he takes in the backseat to other national musicians that he supports.
Today, the fund, from that, starting with that one person, we have 73 employees and growing. We have divisions, and then we have a separate sound recording division, an audio visual division, and a symphonic division. And I will say that each of these divisions then has specialists who do the research. We have 4 people now in the symphonic division who just research which symphonic recording can be attributed to which orchestra, what season, who's on it. I mean, it's a massive amount of research that goes into this. We have people in the sound recording division who are urban specialists. We have somebody else who's like who knows everything about country and Delta blues that you want to know. We have, I mean, it gets that specific. We have people who specialize in sort of
Pre-72 money that just got the Turtles.
Some of you might have heard there was a huge settlement that for pre-72 recordings. We just got a settlement with the subscription services who were denying payment on recordings produced prior to 1972. And what happened is that they weren't paying, the courts they held that the Copyright Act didn't apply to anything prior to 72, even though they were using the product now. And I will say that in a very good decision, the courts ruled that no, the product may have been probably produced prior to it, but if you're going to exploit something after that Copyright Act, then you have to pay a royalty. So there's an awful lot of vintage and legacy recordings that we're now researching and paying people on. It's really tremendous. So as a mix of the research department, we have a separate accounting department. We have a separate department that deals obviously with international compliance, so like making the claims and paying participant services. A department that actually will, if you've been left off of a recording, if you didn't get paid for a recording, if you have a problem collecting, if you can't get access to the website, whatever your issue, this kind of thing of our customer services department. But they handle a huge volume of things. That's kind of the department that interacts with you if you want to contact the fund. And
you can always get a live person. Get a recording.
I will say yes. We're analog kind of folks. So maybe it comes from my age, but I just somehow I don't know anybody else, but I always find it irritating when I call somebody and I have a question. I can go through the menu of 10 items, and none of them are exactly my question. Now, I mean, you make a compromise. So I'm always happy to say that you will always get a live person.
Back to the 3 recording acts that were in the beginning of the slide. How come they haven't been revised or retouched since?
Well,
that is a great question. And I'm going to touch on that later, but I will say right now. First of all, if anybody's ever had the experience of getting anything through Congress, anything ever, the fact that we got not 1 but 3 pieces of legislation to affect this is nothing short of miraculous. And especially the 2 acts, the AHRA and the Digital Media Copyright. Those things really were truly bipartisan activities. I had the pleasure of working on those. I sat in the room with Republicans and Democrats, and we actually, like civilized people, came up with compromises, something that we see in short order today, but it was something that was able to happen, and it really needs, any piece of legislation really almost, with rare exceptions, has to have some bipartisan support.
And we still have that. There's been legislation on the table since 2015. Unfortunately, we now live in an alternative universe. So the legislation, and I was selected as one of the representatives to work with the Recording Academy to work on what's called the Fair Play, Fair Pay, and getting all this enhanced. So I met with our legislator, Fred Sherman in the Valley, And we do have bipartisan support. The AMP Act, which is the producers, is on the table already. And we're about to reintroduce, Grammys was just on the Hill last week, and they're about to reintroduce this bipartisan. And hopefully in our new alternative universe, at our new Congress, this will push through, because we did have bipartisan support for the last 2 years to get the 2015 agenda pushed forward. So we're really hoping, and you know what? What's really, really, really important, each one of your voices here, if you write, and we'll talk about at the end, each one of your voices represents 200 people. So if you go ahead and sign up for Fair Play, Fair Pay, musicfirstcoalition.org, and we'll show you that slide later, your voice will be heard. And this group, this room of, I don't know how many people are in the room, but it's like tenfold. Your voice counts, and don't think your voice is 100-fold. 100-fold, sorry. 100-fold.
But so what happens is that it's hard to propose legislation every year, because it really takes at least 2 or 3 years for a bill to really pass through the various committees and get on the floor, so it's complicated. But we've had, since the year 2000, we've had amendments and new legislation constantly either, in committee or on the floor, and it's just not been able to get it across the finish line. We've come close a couple of times. And I think we have, pretty soon we have another opportunity to do that. We're going to talk about it at the end. But it is something that we work on consistently. It's something we never stop working on. And I feel like that the legislative activity is sort of like, painting the Golden Gate Bridge. We get a piece of legislation involved, and we finish, they're putting that last drop of paint on, and we got to start right over at the beginning to keep, because it changes. And part of it is the world is changing. The world is changing far faster than any kind of legislation can keep up with it, which is why it's important to craft legislation that has sort of loose enough that it can be constantly reinterpreted within the times we live in, but yet provide the kind of protection. And then the other complicated thing is to get, these are things that we live and breathe every day. Everybody in this room understands what's involved in writing a song and performing a song and recording and how it gets used. But then you go to people in Congress who have, there's a few people who live in the large metropolitan areas who, because their constituents will understand this, but the majority of the people have no understanding of what we do. And trying to get them to understand it and explain it, it just becomes, what they think of the music business is not the everyday working person. What they see are a couple of mega bazillionaires, and they think that's who we are. When really, we're everyday working people. These are working families trying to make a living, trying to provide for their families. That's who we really are as a group. And even the people who are the bazillionaires were once upon a time an everyday working stiff in this business. I mean, that's the way it works. And so to get people in the legislature to understand that, it's a complicated process. But we'll talk more about that at the end. So we also have another department. We have our separate IT and software department. We also were able to purchase our own building, and so you can see our collections and what we've done with the fund. I kind of jumped the gun on you there. So,
and again, we did the calculation for people to research. They have a member registration process, so if you don't sign up, you'll just lose out. We have an obligation to do our due diligence and find every performer that's played on our recordings.
And by the way, and even when the name of the fund is the AFM and SAG-AFTRA fund, you do not need to be a member of the union. We will find you, hopefully, and hunt you down and pay you money. So if you run a recording, that's our job. And we do have certain circumstances, some foreign territories require that we have a mandate or a union member that we actually collect for. But that's only true of foreign territories. The domestic monies, you can be a member, you can not be a member, and we'll still try to find you.
If I'm a member and let's say I go to a foreign land that you guys aren't affiliated with, will you fight for that member?
It's harder if we're not affiliated with that territory. That's a really tough thing to do. But what we, if you record in one of those countries, chances are we're going to be able to collect for you. You'd be able to collect money in that country that we wouldn't collect if you hadn't recorded here. So some of that's the case. If we can get some copyright relief, we can change that, because it's very difficult for people to decide, oh, they're only going to record what's called a Rome Convention country. That really is not really an option for most people to say, I'm going to go record in Europe so I can collect my royalties. But you do get, there are circumstances where you will have greater access to royalties by recording in a Rome Convention country. So, but that has all its other, difficulties with it, Pardon?
Africa is one of the countries I'm trying to work in, and it's really hard.
Did you say Africa or South Africa?
Africa.
Okay, because we're negotiating with South Africa right now.
But I know that some countries are really struggling. Africa is still struggling with this. They actually will pay, most
Their own
African nations will pay their people in their own countries, but they won't pay outside. So they still have copyright protections. Ghana, for example, has a fairly robust series of rights and are actually paying themselves and have some foreign payments that they started making. I'm not sure which other countries are paying in Africa, but I know in terms of talking to people from Ghana, that they do it. I know a lot of other African countries are really kind of struggling with this, but they are paying royalties to their own performers. So they actually are providing copyright protection to African performers, which is remarkable, considering, of the struggles and how the countries are emerging and everything. But they've recognized. So that's going back to my point. If all of these countries can recognize the value of performers and pay them accordingly, it's time for the United States to step up to the plate and do the same. So I think this comes back to my axis of evil. And personally, I'd like to see the U.S. be removed from this, and I'm not exactly fond to see us, with other countries.
Wow.
But when you look at this is staggering to me. When you look at how people are treated in North Korea, Iran, and Iraq. Now, I'm not saying we have the same kind of civil rights violations here. I'm not saying that, but in terms of how we treat performers and intellectual property, I just think that it, frankly, is unconscionable. I mean, how can a country like ours? We can talk about a lot of things that aren't provided here. But, clearly, one has to look at it. I don't care what your political persuasion is.
Because the lobbyists protect the National Association of Broadcasters. They don't want to pay.
Well, that's true, because, capitalism does rule the day. And companies like Clear Channel are able to throw money and billions of dollars at things that we can. But we can do something here. And, so we can get the U.S. and Guam off this list, I don't know what we do about health care. But, let's tackle the performers' rights first, and maybe we'll be able to tackle some of these other problems. So, there's a thing called Music First Coalition, and there's a piece of legislation. It's the same legislation that's going to come back time and time again, but it's called Fair Pay for Fair Play. And what this is to create terrestrial radio rights here in the U.S. And why this is important, and because you say, well, if we're not going to have much radio here, it's going to ultimately morph into digital radio and everything, which it will. But right now, because we don't have this, there are hundreds of millions of dollars. Our fund collects $50 million a year. With the passage of this, we would go to $100 million, $150 million a year because of the money that sits on the table in Europe that we can't collect. Right now, even though we collect a lot of money for private copy, some audiovisual rights, we collect some broadcast monies. There's a huge amount of money sitting in a lot of these countries where the music that's played on the radio there, that U.S. artists, we don't get paid a penny for. And if we had that right here, we would be able to do it. Now, I mean, it seems silly because you look at, what music is played over the whole world. The most amount of music is played, I don't think anyone has to get this, U.S. music. Probably followed closely by the UK after that, but there's no doubt that American-made music is the #1 entertainment export in the world. Even more so than our movies. So if you look at that, so what's happening is, say, somebody in Latvia won't pay us about all the American music that's paid in Latvia. And the reason is because we don't have a terrestrial right here, we won't pay them for the Latvian performers that are played here. Now, I don't think there's a whole lot of Latvian music that's played here. Maybe once in a while a record from Latvia makes its way here. But because we won't even technically, just the technicality of not having the ability for a Latvian performer to get paid, Latvia won't pay us for all the U.S. music. And there's a lot of U.S. music played all the other places.
The most egregious.
The question here.
If you're saying that, was it France and Europe somewhere that you're not going to collect royalties from there? That's on Ontario where they're playing music, American music? Is that what you're just saying?
I'm saying that some number of countries, I'm not sure.
For terrestrial radio, for AM, FM stations, since we don't have a right here to pay out to foreign performers, they won't reciprocally pay us. And the biggest abuser, which I was just about to say, is United Kingdom.
Okay, but you're saying that we don't pay their performers that are played here? Is that what you're saying?
Right, because we don't have a right
For
to
digital
terrestrial radio.
broadcasting, but not for the FM radio, no. It's free, we don't pay our own performers, and we don't have equal rights, we don't pay their performers.
But we do have a right for private copy and
digital
webcast.
broadcast.
So we pay their performers for those rights, and we get paid for those rights in those countries.
That was a preface question to this, then. I mean, how does that affect them being part of the UCC? Or the Universal Copyright Convention, wouldn't that kind of...
Because well, there's two things, those affect, for the copyright, those conventions could affect, songwriters and publishers.
Right, ASCAP does get a right. What ASCAP, if Seth is still in the room, I don't know, is
But
fighting
those-
for is an equal right. Because you're not getting paid a lot for your terrestrial radio, you're getting pennies
But-
as opposed to your digital right.
But the
Is that
performance
correct?
rights are covered under other treaties.
Terrestrial broadcast is still very,
Low amount?
no, it's actually
Better?
very good. We want digital to come back
Oh,
up.
digital come back up.
We fully support, for the record, we fully support performers being paid on terrestrial radio. What we don't fully support is taking it out of the dining room.
Oh, no.
We've been negotiating it for 70 years.
Right.
So if there's extra money paid by the industry, it's
Yes.
extra money, not
Yes.
money out of the writer's pockets.
Right. And and for the record, we also very strongly, and firmly support the reallocation and raising the rates. The digital right now, the performance rate, the rates are out of whack. There's a number of things where songwriters and publishers make money in areas that we don't. And the other things from the area of subscription services and stuff like that, the rate is much better for the performers than it is for the songwriters. We also don't think that's fair. We believe in equity for everybody. And we believe that, that once we really establish a fair and decent Copyright Act, we really that treats, songwriters, composers, performers, commensurate with their performance on the record, but their rates should be the same. It's really, there's no common sense that the same performance has a different rate for a songwriter than it does for a performer.
We want fairness for all music creators,
So
basically.
anyway, but it's and that's really has been part of the problem. So just for the record, I think we're all on the same page, and we really have been for a long time. But that's really important. And it is important to the notion that we don't want to take it out of one pocket. Things like people like Clear Channel, and let's be honest here, what they have is, for example, in Europe, everything is digital radio. What we have in our AM, FM radio here is all digital in Europe. And it's digital because there's already a royalty there. Right now, we would have had digital radio in this country 10 years ago on a wholesale level. High quality digital radio, if it wasn't for one thing. Clear Channel and the companies like Clear Channel do not want to pay royalties for that. And so they have bought up all the stations, they own them. It's not quite a monopoly, but it's an incredible control that they have, and they've not been broadcasting digitally because they broadcast digital radio that'll be subject to the Digital Millennium Copyright Act and will have to pay us. So the other thing it's going to do, so not only are they screwing the performers, they're screwing the consumers. People are being screwed out of high quality radio that they could have. I go to Europe and I spend a lot of time in Europe, and the broadcast quality is head and shoulders above what it is here, and I find that absurd. And it's only absurd not because we don't have the technology, not because the country's too vast, too spread out. It's only that way because of the greed of the people in control of that. That's it. And so this act goes a long way to change that. So, having said all that, there's things you can do to find out if you have money for you. And then the most important thing is, I think, at the end of the day, what you want to do is do you have any royalties? And so you might. And I think the only way for you to go, if you're not a union member, it's harder for us to find you. About half of the royalties we pay out are to union performers. Half the people are non-union performers that we actually identify. But the problem is we don't always have their name, their social security number, and address. We know, for example, that we had a guitar player on our record. We might know it might be 2 or 3 different people. It could have been one of these people. So sometimes we have, if we know who you are, and we don't have your address and social security number, you'll be on the unclaimed list. You go here and you go look and you go to the unclaimed list.
I don't have the breakdown.
Royalties up here.
Yeah.
Click on that button and you go to a list that lists all the different people we have royalties for. search for your name, and if you find your name, you contact Participant Services, and they'll walk you through the process of how to claim your royalties. If your name is not on that list, you can still go to the covered sound recording section and look at all different recordings that we paid royalties on. And you search that list to see if there's some records that are familiar to you. You can go through and
It
search
would be
that.
lists, because there's one for each division.
Right. There are separate, but you go through all those things and find the different lists. And you can look at a sound recording, and you'll see a list of credits on that. And you'll say, I played on that record. And you see a whole bunch of people you know who are credited on it, but you're not there. Once again, contact Participant Services. You can do that online. So, and this is how you find everybody. You will find everybody, though, by just going to the website, which is listed on the bag we
It's
sent
on the
out.
merch, it's on
It's on all the merch. I'm sorry if the URL is a silly, long URL because it was established by union officers and they like long, fancy names and stuff. So the URL is www.afmsagaftra.fund.org.
Wow. Used to
And
be our
one thing, if you ever receive something via social media or a telephone call from us, know that we're trying to find you. Please, please do not hang up.
Yeah. People have often thought we're
Brian
like
Stewart has spent a great deal of time calling people, and I know Brian's had one experience I've never really called somebody who has a significant amount of money, and Brian said, I'm from the fund, I've got some money for you, and he gets that for him because somebody hangs up on him. And Brian calls him back, says, don't hang up, I have, click. By about the third or fourth time, they might get through to say, I really do have money for you, and they might listen. A couple of people kind of grudgingly come to the office to collect what they think would be, $4 or $5, and wound up taking a check for $40,000 or $50,000 home. So not every check is for that. I want to make sure you don't know that, but you'd be surprised how this adds up. Question back here.
Is there access to your slides, which you have, can be emailed or?
Yeah, we can email you
Your
the
presentation,
Yeah, right here. It's actually on
it's on there? It's on the sticks.
Oh, we gotta do the six. Yes.
Yeah. So everything I kind of rambled on about is right here to.
So before you replace it with 8 gigs of music, we'll watch the slide.